What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's network for the best decks in the standard format in the Pokemon trading card game in August 2022. The newest set is the Pokemon Go mini set, but the newest main set out right now for this standard format is Astral Radiance. The next major event is going to be the Pokemon World Championships at the end of August, and we don't know about the new season, anything like that, starting probably in September. So right now, all we have on the horizon is online events and the World Championships, and these deck rankings will reflect pretty much my thoughts on what the best decks are going into the World Championships. In this video, I'll talk about the positives and negatives for each deck in the top 10 list, and I will also have sample lists for them, and at the end show all top 10 decks according to my opinion on what the best decks are. So let's just get into the video now. Shout out to my sponsors: Dragon Shield Sleeves, PoTownStore.com, CardTrooperGames.com, Beast Coast Pokemon, and PokemonCard.io. You can use code Celio for 5% off on Pokemon TCG online codes at Potown Store and on physical Pokemon TCG products over at CardTrooperGames.com. I have an affiliate link for Dragon Shield Sleeves. If you are shopping for sleeves, please use that link. I have a link to Beast Coast Pokemon, an awesome Pokemon YouTube channel that you should subscribe to, and also PokemonCard.io, where you can share and view the community's deck lists. Number 10 will be Blissey v Miltank for me in the month of August. The positives about this deck are that it's cheap to build, it's easy and fun to play, it can essentially auto-win versus decks that don't have a counter for Miltank, and fighting type Pokemon are not that popular, so Blissey V will not be hurt too badly by a meta full fighting type Pokemon because there aren't many fighting type Pokemon around in popular and strong decks right now. The negatives for Blissey v Miltank is that it can be predictable, that you really only have Blissey and Miltank. You have the Eviltal that can discard some cards. Sometimes you'll have the Tornadus that can make your opponent switch. You have Radiant Greninja to draw cards, but Blissey v Miltank doesn't have a lot of combos. It doesn't have a lot of things that it can search for utility options in the middle of the game. So Blissey v Miltank can be quite predictable, I feel. And also it takes a few turns to ramp up to big damage with Blissful Blast. Here's a sample list for the deck, including some of those cards I was mentioning. This one does not, however, include the Yveltal from Celebrations. Not Yveltal from Celebrations, the Yveltal from, yeah, it is Celebrations. This list in particular doesn't include that. It's using Crushing Hammers to remove energies instead. And yeah, we won't be spending too much time on these sample lists, though. Number 9 is going to be Arceus Duraludono. I think Arceus Duraludono is underrated because it's a pretty easy deck to play and it can be pretty boring. So higher skilled players often really talk down about this deck just because they feel they can't make a difference within their games, but that doesn't change the fact that this deck can perform very well. It won a regional championships this season, and it has a decent Palkia matchup and a questionable Arceus Inteleon matchup and some other great matchups across the board. The positives with this deck: it has high HP and it has healing within the deck. It's consistent and aggressive. With that 220 damage from VMAX Pulverization, it's easy to boss and knock out V Pokemon on the bench. It's moderately easy to play, definitely not one of the harder decks on this list to play, and it has a natural counter built into Miltank, so if you're worried about things like that Miltank card, VMAX Pulverization goes through effects like that. The negatives: it's linear and it's predictable, similar to Blissey, and similar to a lot of the decks that we'll have on the lower half of this list. The reason they're not on the upper half of the list is because they can be predictable and skill can come in to be a factor in certain matchups. When your opponent can make plays around your deck, but your deck really only has one line of play, that can be the difference. It has no onboard engine after Starbirth is used, so once you've used Starbirth, you can't really search out cards and hand pick your options. You just have to kind of play whatever is in your hand. And it can be countered by Echoing Horn, namely against Mew, which plays Echoing Horn, and Palkia can sometimes also get there by putting an extra Pokemon onto the bench and bring that up and knock that out instead of going through the Duraludon VMAX that you've offered them with. Arceus Duraludono VMAX lists are pretty simple. They haven't changed a lot. You can choose to play Single Strike Mustard in the deck or not to play it. You can choose to play Collapse Stadium. You can choose to play Charon's Care, but for the most part, they've stayed pretty similar throughout the past 6 months or so. Next is going to be Dialga V-Star. Dialga V-Star's Star Chronos V-Star Power Attack is the main draw of this card, and the deck built around it. Star Chronos for 220 damage, and then you get to take another turn automatically, and then Metal Blast does a whole lot of damage if you already have those energies that were required for Star Chronos. The positives about this archetype: Star Chronos is a very powerful attack, just plain and simple. You do 220 and then take another turn, and your opponent can't do anything to stop that. Metal Blast can one-shot V-Stars. Like I mentioned, if you already have the energy requirement for Star Chronos, Metal Blast is doing a minimum of 240 damage. Silene, the supporter, which we'll see in the deck list here in a second, can recycle important resources. And this deck can just high roll and pop off, get a turn 2 Star Chronos and take a knockout and then another knockout, and your opponent might just not have any ways to come back into the game after that. The negatives for this deck: it's linear. You are pretty much only attacking with Dialga V-Star. You can draw cards you need in the wrong order. So what I mean by that is you could not have energies to discard, but you have Metal Saucer in your hand, or you have too much energy in your hand and no way to discard them, or you have Metal Saucers in your hand but no energies in the discard yet and no way to get them there. So because this deck is combo reliant, as the next bullet point says, that can be an issue with the deck. You can get awkward and clunky draws, just drawing the wrong cards at the wrong time with this deck, a little bit more than other kinds of decks can, in my opinion, but it is strong enough to be up here in the top 10, and this list is from Alex Shemansky. I think, whenever a very good player that I respect is playing a deck list for a deck that has been a little under the radar, a little less played, a little less respected, I always tend to go towards their deck for this kind of video and for this kind of representation of the deck, because it's clear that Alex has put a lot of work into the deck and also played it in some online events to good finishes. Next is Arceus Mewtwo VUNION. This is one of the newer decks. This is probably the newest deck on this list. This is an attacking Mewtwo VUNION variant as opposed to the control variant. The positives about this: Mewtwo VUNION has 3 very strong attacks. Psysplosion puts 16 damage on your opponent's Pokemon in any way you like. Super Regeneration heals 200 damage. And Final Burn does 300 damage. Like, these attacks are just ridiculous, and they're all on the same card. And Dark type counters are at an all-time low right now, so the stars are aligning for Mewtwo VUNION. It has the consistency of Starbirth and Trinity Nova, which we know to be good, whether it's in a straight Arceus deck or something like Arceus Duraludono that can carry an archetype. And like I said, the lack of darkness type Pokemon that are current in the metagame. The negatives: VUnions come with natural inconsistencies. You have to throw 4 cards into the discard pile in order to Exodia them, and then you can only do that once a game. So it comes with natural inconsistencies. You can't afford to bench Mewtwo against Dark typically, unless you're going to close out the game with it. If your opponent has Dark, like an Inteleon counterbox or something like that, you might be left with Arceus V-Star as your only attacker. And this deck only plays 4 basic Pokemon, so it's going to mulligan more than the average deck. And this is what Arceus Mewtwo VUnion decks are looking like right now. Some play the Professor Burnett to search the deck for 2 cards and discard them. Some play different stadium lineups. I've actually really liked the variants that play Pokestop. But like I said, there's been so many lists and builds for this that have come out, some with more healing than others, some with different stadium counts. But the archetype is all there. The archetype is the same. It's just Arceus V-Star with a Mewtwo VUnion backing it and nothing else, similar to how Arceus Duraludon plays. Number 6 is going to be Ice Rider Calyrex. This is paired with a thin line of Palkia V-Star typically. Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX is very strong because Max Lance can do 250 damage. With a belt, it does 280, and with a Leon, it does 310. The combo to knock out 310 Pokemon or a Pokemon V-Star with a big charm on it is typically going to be either Choice Belt or Leon or Tool Scrapper, some combination of those three. You need two of those pieces. So the positives about this deck is that it one-shots V-Stars, and it has the consistency of the Drizzile Shady Dealings Inteleon engine. It has the burst potential of Palkia V-Star's Star Portal that accelerates multiple energy onto the board in an instant. And Ice Rider rarely gets one hit knocked out by other Pokemon that are popular in the metagame. The negatives, this deck is often labeled as an inconsistent deck because it does need combo pieces to achieve its optimal performance, and VMAXs are larger risks than V-Stars because they're worth 3 prizes instead of 2, obviously. This is what current Ice Rider decks are looking like with that 1/1 Palkia V-Star, like I mentioned, and you'll have the combo pieces of Belt and Scrapper and Leon in there. And you can fetch those with Drizziles and Inteleons, reuse those with Scoop Up Nets. You can get some of the pieces with Irida as well, and Ice Rider Calyrex just wants to end the game by taking those very dominant knockouts on V-Star Pokemon and leaving your opponent with not enough time to come back into the game. Number 5, Arceus Flying Pikachu. This is the deck that Azul won the North American International Championships with, so it should certainly be on your radar just because of that. But the deck is good, even if Azul didn't win NAIC with it. The positives, it has a win condition versus most meta decks. It's fairly consistent, and it has type advantage against Palkia with Flying Pikachu VMAX in there. The negatives, no Inteleon engine, it can't search specific cards, so compared to Arceus Inteleon, AI is going to be able to search out Charon's Care whenever it needs it. Arceus Flying Pikachu has to draw into the Charon's Care. And it has many 50-50-ish matchups, very few easy matchups, in my opinion. And yeah, the list hasn't really changed since Azul won NAIC. This is from a recent online event. It might have a couple of different cards in it, but all in all, the list has not changed very much. Number 4, Mewtwo VUNION Control. So this was piloted to a top 4 finish by Sander Wojcik. I think this is the hardest deck to play in the current standard format because control decks are very fragile in that they're very dominant once you've got to that end game board state and you've set up the circumstances that you need. But if you misplay at some point and you allow your opponent to get a knockout they shouldn't have gotten, or you use too many resources on one turn that you will need a couple of turns later, small mistakes like that can bring this deck crumbling down. So it is not a deck I suggest anyone to pick up unless you've already began feeling comfortable with it and really learning the deck. The positives, it's difficult and frustrating to play against, and it often allows for the better player to win, which is why we saw Sander Wojcik go so far with the deck. The negatives, it's the hardest deck to play, and it's slightly weaker now that it is a known deck as opposed to NAIC when it was a new deck on the field. And here's what the decks look like. You use Silene to get back resources, Team Yell's Cheer to get back resources, Palpad as well. The new Pokestop has been added in some lists. And you use Miltank to wall out Pokemon. You use Gormandize from Snorlax early on in the game. You can use 2, 3, 4 Snorlaxes that your opponent knocks out. And then if they don't have a Miltank answer, you can just simply win the game by that. But most decks are going to have some way to damage Miltank, even if it's not efficient. So you will have to attack with Miltank, or maybe bring out Mewtwo VUnion and close the game out that way by just using Super Regeneration over and over and then clearing their board with Psysplosion or Final Burn if you run them out of resources. Number 3 is Mew VMAX Genesect. This deck is just so powerful. It's the most explosive and aggressive deck in the metagame by far. I don't think there's any questions asked on that. It can start taking KOs on turn 1 because of Meloetta, Players have stopped countering it as much because it's not the most popular anymore. And the deck is just consistent and draws a lot of cards. If there's no path to the peak on the board, you can just draw your whole deck with this. You could decide. It looks like the Mew player gets to do whatever they want if path to the peak is not on the board in most games. So the negatives is going to be that it's weak to path to the peak. This deck is still incredibly strong. It's being countered less and less, it seems. So I don't feel like this deck can win Worlds, but it feels like a very strong deck in the Worlds metagame. Number 2 is going to be Arceus Inteleon. It has possibly the best matchup spread. It's the most consistent deck after turn 1, and skill and practice is rewarded with this deck. The negatives, turn 1 without Arceus and or energy is very rough, and Memory Capsule Jolteon decks could return, but you kill their EV Jolteon, they're not even a real deck sometimes. But Arceus Inteleon is my favorite deck, hands down, in this format. I played it to Milwaukee to a day 2, and I played it to NAIC to a lose the winning in, or yeah, lost the winning in. I was at 5-2-2 to day 2 at NAIC. If I was going to Worlds, I would be playing it at Worlds. I think this deck is incredible. With the double Pal Pad, you can play 6 Charon's Cares in a game and out heal a lot of things. The deck is very consistent, doing the same thing turn after turn, game after game, as long as you get that turn 1 Arceus plus energy. So yeah, this is what decks are kind of looking like right now. You can play those extra 11th and 12th energies being the captures for extra consistency. You could even cut the 3rd double turbo for another capture if you feel like that really helps your turn 1s out. But yeah, like I said, this deck is very calculated and consistent, and it's consistently just strong enough, I feel, because it doesn't do anything crazy, but it's consistently just powerful enough to do what it needs to do, and kind of overcome most decks in the metagame just by healing with Charon's Cares over and over. And finally, the number 1 is going to be Palkia Inteleon. I couldn't even list any real negatives for this deck. It's positives. It has everything: raw power, adaptability, consistency. It has win conditions versus just about anything, and it can have a strong hand going first or second. The negatives is just that it has a target on its back. It's that we know it's out there, and we know it's good, and we know a lot of people are going to play it, but the deck is cracked. Palkia Inteleon is so good. It's just very, very strong. And even though I like Arceus Inteleon more, and I think I'd be playing Arceus Inteleon because I like the way it takes control of games, I don't think I could call Arceus Inteleon the best deck right now, because Palkia Inteleon, like I said, it just has no negatives. I feel it feels like it can have a win condition versus everything. It can be teched and built multiple ways. Palkia V-Star can even miss energy on turn 1, and it doesn't matter because of Star Portal. It also gets the turn 1 Pokemon down that it needs more often because of the way this deck can be built with the Battle Passes and Battle Pass, Quick Ball, Hisuian Heavy Ball. Getting those turn 1 hands to be really good. And also going second, you have 4 Pass and 4 Irida, so you have very high chances of having at least one of those in your hand to use on turn 1 going second. So Palkia V-Star Inteleon is going to be my number 1 deck here, and this is the full top 10 list that we counted down today. Any questions about it or any of the decks that I talked about, please leave it in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching today. I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.